Take your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Genesis chapter 20. Genesis chapter 20. I have really thought about this message today, and I've had some problems trying to get it started because I got like 6 introductions that I can use for this. And if I gave you all 6, well, we would be out of time and I wouldn't have said anything. So I'm going to start with Peter and Jesus. Peter and Jesus always had some very interesting conversations. And Peter came up, and this is not a silly conversation. I truly believe that Peter wanted to know this answer. He came to Jesus and he said, "My brother sins against me. How many times should I forgive him?" 7 times. Now, here's the situation. Peter is asking a question, and the Greek language makes it very clear. If my brother does the exact same thing to me over and over and over and over again, how many times am I really required to forgive them for this particular sin? And Peter throws out a hypothetical number. Is 7 a good number? And see, Peter is being very generous here because the Pharisees and the rabbis taught that if someone did the same thing to you 3 times in a row and asked forgiveness, you were required to forgive them. Because there are 4 numbers that mean completeness. The number 3 stands for completeness. The number 7 stands for completeness. The number 10 stands for completeness. And the number 12 stands for completeness as well. But they all have different connotations. The number 7 is actually the perfection and the divine completeness of God. The number 10 is the idea of a fullness, an abundance of completion. When you look at Noah's Ark, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The number 4 stands for judgment, and 10 means a full or complete judgment. And the number 12 stands for the idea of family judgment because there were 12 sons of Jacob who became the 12 tribes, and there were 12 apostles. But the number 3 is also a number of completeness. It's the idea of being enough. And Jesus looks at Peter, and I'm thinking that probably Jesus is like, yeah, that's pretty good, Peter. You're better off than a lot of people are. But here's what I say. If your brother sins against you and does the exact same thing time and time and time again, you are not supposed to forgive them 7 times, but 7 times 70. And those of you who are math wizards, you know that is 490. And that number is kind of symbolic. It's not literal. I'm not supposed to take and write Jan's name down and she burnt my toast today. 1. She burnt my toast again. 2. She burnt my toast. Because that ain't forgiving, you know. Paul says love keeps no record of wrongs. So that's not forgiveness. But it's the idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness is to be the way of life. Now, we're not supposed to be naive either, but we are to forgive. And I think that if God requires us to forgive our brothers and sisters the exact same sin 490 times, just to kind of be literal for a little bit, how many more times is God going to forgive us when we sin the exact same way? Because it would be wonderful if, we get burned and we learn our lesson. But unfortunately, we don't. And the writer of Hebrews talks about the sin that easily besets us. And that means there's a sin that we are more subject to do. Somebody might have maybe drunkenness or drug abuse, while somebody else goes, that's not a problem to me, while somebody else's might be gossiping or gluttony, and somebody else, like, I have no problem with either one of those. So, but we do have problems Abraham today, and we find Abraham after a great spiritual height, accomplishment. He is on the highest hill. He is really there with a wonderful experience with God. We see him giving back into this whole idea of fear again. Let's begin reading in Genesis chapter 20, verse 1 through verse 3. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah his wife, listen closely now, she is my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Let's just stop right there for just a moment. One of my favorite songs from the British invasion from the 60s is Herman and the Hermits, Henry VIII, I Am. And the reason why I like it is they sing the first verse, there's a little guitar instrumental, and then when they get ready for the second verse, one of them yells, second verse, same as the first. And here we go. Second verse, same as the first. Except this time, instead of being in Egypt, he is in what we would call the Gaza Strip today. Abimelech is the king of a city of the Philistines. Now, they're not called Philistines right now. They are just people. What they are, ethnically, is that they are Egyptians who have left Egypt. They have gone north, and they are living just outside of the land of the Canaanites. Now, to call a person a Philistine today is to suggest that they are uncultured, they are uncouth, that they're a savage or barbarian. It is an insult today to be called a Philistine. But actually, during the biblical times, even during the days of the Judges and Samson, even during the times of David and Solomon, the Philistines were a very cultured people. They were very intellectual. They had libraries and they had unique architecture. You know, we think of Grecian or Corinthian columns and different things in a lot of our buildings today. Well, the Philistines had the exact same thing. Their designs of buildings were just remarkable. Remember, they had a temple that when Samson pushed down 2 pillars, the whole thing collapsed. It was all structurally based on those 2 pillars. And archaeologists have found these temples, and they're just like, it's absolutely amazing. We're not sure we could build something this size the way they did. But Abraham, I don't think this time he's doing anything wrong. We know there was a famine in the land, and he left the land and went to Egypt without inquiring of God about that, because the Bible tells us so. But I'm thinking now that Abraham has just had this wonderful experience with God. That God has revealed to him his plans. He tells him what's going on for Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities that are around about. And Abraham has made intercession. And God has agreed, after a lot of negotiation on the part of Abraham, if there are 10 righteous people, I will not destroy the cities. One day, Abraham gets up, and maybe he wants to revisit that place where he last stood with God. And he gets up and he looks out across the fertile plains, and there is black smoke rising up. And he's looking there, and I think his heart is broken. He is distressed. I do not know whether he knows if Lot has escaped or what. If he tried to find Lot, he probably wouldn't find him, because Lot had gone to a city, and there from a city he had gone into the mountains. So he might not have been able to find him. But I think it's pretty hard for him to look out and see that smoke day after day. So he just takes his sheep and flocks and animals and herds and goes down to the land of the Philistines, the land of Gaza. And there, Abraham says of Sarah, she is my sister. Now, yes, that's true. But it's what we call a half-truth. But I remember one time, I always struggled with true-false questions on an exam. Because I would look at this part, and this part is true, but that part is false. And finally, one day, my teacher said, if any of it is false, it's all false. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's easy. Y'all probably knew that already, but somebody had to tell me, if any of it's false, it's all false. So, she is my sister. That's truth. But even by not saying, but she's also my wife, she's my half-sister and she's also my wife, Abraham is telling a lie to Abimelech. Now, Abimelech, as I said, is the king. His name means my father is the king. And that's not his name. It's more of a title like Pharaoh is. Because we're going to keep seeing Abimelech throughout the scriptures time and time again. Matter of fact, Isaac does the same little trick with Abimelech as well. But Abimelech, unlike Pharaoh, sees Sarah, who is approaching 90 years old, and thinking, this is a beautiful, glamorous, cultured, classic woman. I will take her to be my wife. Because she's not married. This is Abraham's sister. And he brings her into his house. But one night, God comes to Abimelech in a dream. We see that in verse 3. But God came into Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art a dead man, for the woman thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also the righteous nation? Said he not unto me, she is my sister? And she even herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands have I done this. We don't often think about it, but sometimes when we sin, we unknowingly cause other people to sin. Abimelech says, in the innocency of my hands, in the integrity of my heart, I thought what I was doing was right. There's nothing wrong with me taking this single woman to be my wife. Because didn't he tell me she was his sister? And didn't she tell me that this is my brother? He said, I'm innocent. And he's kind of using the same argument that God or Abraham used with God in the previous chapter. Will you punish the righteous with the guilty? And God won't. Remember, Jesus tells the parable of the tares and the wheat. And he tells the story how one day a man went out and he planted his fields with wheat. But during the night, an enemy came and he scattered tares, weeds, thistles, whatever you want to call them, among the good wheat. And the thing with tares and wheat, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two until they mature. The wheat has a golden head to it, while the head of the tares are not quite, they're more white than they are of a golden color. So if you just go out in the field and start pulling it up, well, because the roots are intertwined, you're going to pull some of the wheat out by accident. But it's also, in the early stages, very difficult to tell the difference. So if you judge too soon, you could accidentally just pull up wheat, not realizing. So he says, wait until the time of fullness. Wait until the harvest time, and then we will harvest, and when it's easy, we'll be able to separate the good from the bad. And God will not punish the righteous with the wicked. That's the whole purpose of Jesus telling that parable, that God, even though we may have a weak faith, and if God was to pull us up right now, we might not feel right about ourselves, our situation. There might be some who are struggling that we would want to judge, but God is merciful and he is kind. And he says, no, I will not do that. And because I knew you did this in the innocence of your heart and in the integrity of your heart, I am the one who kept you from going to Sarah and consummating your marriage. But you're going to die. You're going to die. But again, God is so merciful to us. He tells him, you're going to die as things are right now. But go to Abraham, because he is a prophet. He is my prophet. Not a good testimony for a prophet of God, but God acknowledges him for his imperfection, that yes, he is my prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live if thou restore her not. Know that you will die. And I didn't read all that. I just kind of gave you the essence there. So, give Sarah back. Abraham will pray. You live. You don't give her back. He won't pray. And you are going to die. As a Christian, have you ever thought about somebody else? What were you thinking when you did this or that? Have you ever thought about yourself? What was I thinking when I did this or that? I think we all have. Our old nature never dies here and now. We are saved, we are redeemed, we are going to go to heaven. But Paul does write and tell us in numerous places in his writings that we still have our flesh. And that the flesh wars against our spirit. And you know when the flesh does the best fighting? It's after we have won a great victory. We have accomplished something. We have stood against sin. We have done a great testimony before the Lord and before God's people. And God has been glorified and great things have happened. And we're like, praise the Lord, I have made it. And then all of a sudden, there used to be, I think they're still playing, it's called the knockout game. Young people, you're walking down the street in town and they'll walk up behind you and slam you in the back of the head and knock you out. Actually, they attack older people to do that. Young punks in the cities are walking around, and it's called the knockout game. One time I watched a video of this on the news where the kid swung at the wrong old man. The old man had a walking stick, started beating him, good wooden cane, started beating the kid with his, and he won the knockout game that day. But that's the way Satan is. Satan doesn't walk up fair and say, okay, Marcus of Queensberry rules here. He waits till, whew, and then bam, he gets you in the back of the head. And I think that's what happened to Abraham. His old Adamic nature came in. And we see how, because of this, Abimelech was hurt as well. An entire nation could have been hurt and made to suffer. Not real encouraging, but we know that God is righteous, and that is what is truly encouraging, when we know that we can depend on God to be right no matter what. Now, beginning in verses 14 through 18, we see God heal Abimelech. And well, let me back up. I'm not finished with the whole spirit versus flesh idea. This week I got really interested in that old saying, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And I posted a picture on Facebook of a silk purse that is made out of a sow's ear. You can do it. In 1921, a man by the name of Arthur D. Little started a chemical company. And he wanted to do something to get all this publicity for his company. And he did a couple of different things over the years to get his company in the limelight. And his company is still in business. But the first thing he did was going to prove that you can do the impossible if you try hard enough. And he took buckets of sow's ears that he got at the butcher shop. He treated them with acetone, formaldehyde, and some kind of lime powder and gelatin. And then he forced it through a spindle so that he got fine threads, and he was able to weave 2 silk purses. Now, these silk purses are not purses like you think of. It's more of a tube that you can tie on each end, sort of like a Tootsie Roll wrapper that's been twisted, but you tie it. You put gold coins on one side and silver coins on the other side. It's the way the thing was set up. And one of them is in the Smithsonian today. But the whole idea behind you can't make a silk purse of a sow's ear is this: we remain true to our nature. I like the Spanish version of it. When I was taking Spanish class, our teacher taught us that in Peru, they said, though you dress a monkey in silk, it remains a monkey. And that's true. God has washed us. God has cleaned us. But if we are not walking with him constantly every day, the old nature creeps in, and we will revert back to that nature if we're not careful. So now we're ready for 14 through 18. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and manservants and womanservants and gave them unto Abraham and restored him Sarah his wife. And Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before thee, dwell where it pleaseth thee. And unto Sarah he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of thine eyes, unto all that are with thee, and with all others. Thus she was reproved. So Abraham prayed unto God, and Abraham healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. God healed Abimelech. And I see this as really, again, the righteous person pleading for the unrighteous. The believer praying for those who are not right. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, we know that he went to the Garden of Gethsemane and he prayed 3 times. And then when the temple guards and the Roman guards and all the people came up, Peter pulled out his sword and he lopped off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. I think a lot of times we're like Peter. We're really good at lopping off ears. Now, truthfully, I don't believe that was Peter's intentions. I believe his intentions was to smack him right down the top of the head and cleave him from top to bottom. Peter, being a fisherman, though, swung and missed and caught the ear. But you know what? God is so gracious. God is so loving. When we mess up, God reaches down and he restores. He went and he took the ear, Jesus did, of the servant, and he put it back on the servant and healed him instantaneously. Now, what Abimelech had done, God has punished him, but now that he has made it right, God is blessing him. And you know, that sometimes happens too. God can take our mistakes, he can take the bad things that happen to us, and he can turn them into a blessing when it is necessary and when it is needful. The Bible tells us that on 2 occasions, Joseph, in the book of Genesis, when he was sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites and then sold to Potiphar and been thrown into prison, he becomes the second in command of all of Egypt, and his brothers come to get food. When he finally reveals himself, I am Joseph, your brother, they freak out. Not because this is Joseph, our brother, but because, oh my goodness, this is Joseph, our brother. He is now the second command in Egypt. He's already thrown us in jail once. Simeon has been thrown into jail a second time. We are going to die kind of situation. And Joseph says, don't worry. You meant this for evil to me. You meant it for bad, but God allowed it to happen to bring about good. Because now Joseph, he is in a position to take care of his family in a way that nobody else could have done. He is, for all intents and purposes, the ruler of Egypt, except for the name. Potiphar said didn't even know where his next meal was going to come from because he trusted Joseph with everything and Joseph prospered him. Pharaoh is pretty much the exact same way. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know the business. He doesn't know that he now personally owns all the land of Egypt. But Joseph has done all of this. Again, when Jacob dies, the brothers come and they tell a lie. Our father told us before he died to come to you and for you to forgive us for what we did to you. Jacob never said that to the boys. But they're trying to play on Joseph's sympathy for their recently departed dad. And again, Joseph's heart is sorrowing because of what his brothers are going through. And again reminds them, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Sometimes we mess up. Sometimes we sin. We fall short of the glory of God. Sometimes bad things happen to us, but God can take them and use them for good. Let's all stand for a word of prayer.